Hello there. Well, gosh, I wasn't expecting you. Come on in. Sit down. Take a load off. Thanks for coming. You have successfully accessed a new episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Thanks for clicking on the show. I'm your host, Don Kleppen. The show where we're trying to take a journalistic look at all things cannabis from my vantage point here in the city of Chicago in Illinois, a legal cannabis state. And I like to kind of share my experiences relating to cannabis as to what life is like here in these states and talk to experts who are in the space of legal cannabis, whether those be entrepreneurs, professors, researchers, doctors, journalists, politicians, or policy leaders, anybody who is kind of at the forefront of this new legal cannabis frontier. And I like to bring those conversations to you. I also like to bring up my perspective on various news stories, topics, as well as give you my take on certain events, cannabis events that are happening in and around the state, and just kind of chronicle and celebrate this moment in history where the prohibition in the United States against cannabis is ending slowly. And it's just a very exciting time, and I love kind of talking about it and bringing any new information I can to you. You can always follow the show on social media at C-Man Podcast on X and Instagram. It's the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page. It's up on YouTube as well. However you're listening to this, if it is on YouTube, if it's on a podcast platform like Spotify, Apple, or iHeart, do me a favor and leave a rating or a review for the show, and be sure to tell your friends about it as well. Anybody you think might be interested in what's going on in the cannabis space, tell them about the Cannabis Man podcast. And if you really like what I'm doing and you want to offer some support, you can scroll down and become a subscriber by hitting the support the show link in the description notes. That'll take you to Buzzsprout where you can become a subscriber. And if you do, you'll get a shout out on the next episode in the credits, and I'll send a thank you email for joining the ranks of the Cannabis Man supporters there. I have a great interview that I'm excited to share with you. Chicago is a wonderful, wonderful city for a lot of different reasons. One of the best of them, I think, is just its world-class food scene. There are a few great restaurant groups here, lots of different spots to hang out, and the 50/50 group, they are moving into the cannabis space. You've heard me talk about a partnership that they struck with Cresco Labs to make this limited time buffalo wing sauce infused with THC for the Super Bowl that I got to try. They have also partnered with OK Cannabis, and they own the West Town Bakeries and have opened a new location of that in Evanston. And so I'm talking with someone from the 50/50 group today about their mission, kind of how they got started and why they're moving into the cannabis space and all the cool work that they've got going on. So I've got that interview as well as some news stories, topics, and events to tell you about in the News Joint Wrap. And I want to talk to you about who is doing the most lobbying right now in order to get safe banking and other cannabis legislation passed. It may not be who you think it is, and there are some interesting reasons as to why. So strap in, pack the bowl, the bong, seal up that joint, fire up the blowtorch for your dab rig, whatever it is you got going here, get ready to inhale another episode of the Cannabis Man podcast.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis Broadcast.
Yeah, and speaking of inhale, I want to share with you my strain of the week. I've got my coffee going here. I just went and picked up some croissants and coffee from this Metropolis coffee shop. I've brought it up on the show before, I know. I'm here in Edgewater on the far north side of Chicago, and on Granville, the street I live off of, there's a great bakery and coffee shop, Metropolis. They've been around for a while here in Chicago, and they sell their bags of coffee elsewhere, but I just love going over there and getting a latte or some croissants, or they have these great hand pies, egg and cheese and spinach and feta and stuff like that. So I had a couple of those for breakfast, and I got the coffee right here. And I've mentioned on the show before how much I love pairing cannabis and coffee to start the day. And the cannabis part of that equation for me this week has come from a Cresco Labs product called Lemon Sugar. This is a sweet and uplifting sativa. I've really been liking this week. The sweet candy, citrus, and earthy profile stems from top terpenes, caryophyllene, limonene, and linalool. You know, listener, I've brought up many times on the show how much I love sativas, and limonene is quickly becoming one of my top terpenes. I definitely tend to gravitate towards strains with that as one of the top ones. It tends to lean into a citrusy, fresh, and clean kind of flavor, and those really speak to me. Lemon Sugar is an offspring of award-winning Lemon Bean and Sugar Daddy number 7, and it absolutely has the traditional energizing and uplifting sativa effects. This batch I have here was harvested in November of 2023 and packaged in December. And the container's average THC is 25%. Flavors are listed as sweet, candy, citrus, and earthy. I definitely get the citrus and the sweetness. I mean, you could call it candy. The lemon sugar, I think, kind of primes your brain to think of that sort of sweetness. But for me, with the limonene terpenes, the citrusy stuff comes through the most. And as I mentioned, the top reported effects include energizing and uplifting, my favorite parts of the sativa strains that I usually lean into. I enjoy combining especially caffeine with like sativa cannabis because the creative and uplifting energy, especially like to start the morning and the day, I just think the little bit of energy from the caffeine, and caffeine, by the way, is a mild euphoric. It's actually classified as a mild hallucinogen, which is something that obviously when you think of hallucinogenic drugs, I know people don't think of caffeine, but there is a strong, compelling reason for the overlap between cannabis and caffeine. And I feel like that's part of the big draw, at least for me. And I've really been noticing this week, you know, my tolerance is still not what it was. I mean, here we are. I'm recording this on Leap Day, February 29th. So I'm a full month removed from my tolerance break of dry January. And my tolerance is still not what it was. I was hanging out with a friend, Evan, the other night, and we smoked a few joints, and we included some rosin. You know, Evan brought some hash over, and we kind of packed some super joints, and we smoked those up, and man, I mean, I was just really on another planet there for a little while. But I've really been enjoying this last week, kind of this lemon sugar and the vibe that it cultivates in the morning alongside some coffee, and just that sweet, creative, energetic spot. I mean, I'm not twitching. You know, it's not the kind of energy where you're like tweaking and twitching and you're on edge or anything like that. It's just a nice lift from the sleep after exercise with a little caffeine. And then kind of, you know, you're brought down from the peak of the caffeine into like this sweet spot summit below the peak and kind of a smooth ride forward thanks to the cannabis and the euphoric but a little more chill energy of the sativa. The uplift is still there, the peak and the energy is still there, but it's not exactly like a stimulant. It's not like sugar, or it's not like you've had too much caffeine like an espresso or something and you're kind of bouncing off the walls and sweating and stuff like that. You know, for me, it's kind of a spectrum in terms of altered states and how you can kind of feel throughout the day. We know that there is a wide range and a large wheel of emotions and conditions that we can feel at any one time. And for me, for my money, I just love what the combination of cannabis and caffeine, especially a nice sativa with some limonene like this lemon sugar, the little dance that those two substances do, at least in my system, they put me on a level that I really enjoy, especially kind of early in the day with some sunshine and walking around outside. It's another cold day in Chicago, and if you're around here, the Midwest, you know what I'm talking about, but warmer in the sunlight, and something like this definitely makes it easy if you got a dog walker or some, you know, reason to step outside and just kind of hang in the sun, even on a colder day. This is a nice way to start the day and kind of gets you off on the right foot. So cheers, pick up some lemon sugar if you're in the area and you enjoy kind of a nice uplifting sativa to start your day like I do. Oh yeah, that's nice. That is lemony and sugary. And speaking of sweet, I wanted to bring up one note here for those of us in the Chicago area, and especially those of us in media, but I think anybody who's lived here and pays attention to the weather in any capacity, which I feel like all of us kind of have to do. It's sort of a big part of our lives here with all the changes that it goes through with Lake Michigan and kind of the place that it is in the country. Chicago is a crazy weather scene. And there has been a man who has been just at the top of reporting on this weather for us for the last 45 years, and he gave his last weather forecast last night. I'm talking about WGN's Tom Skilling. Now, I am a 36-year-old man. I've lived in the Chicago area since I was 5 years old. So for my entire life, Tom Skilling has been synonymous with accuracy and kind of, meteorological joy. And we've been so spoiled here because those of us here in the Midwest in general, anybody around Lake Michigan, we all live in a crazy hub of weather activity. I think anybody who grew up in this area knows, oftentimes a 3-day forecast felt like it was just made up and they're doing the best they can to give a guess. But it's kind of like, if you don't like the weather, wait an hour, because that is how often it changes. And so it can be very difficult to accurately predict in this area what's coming. And those of us who have been paying attention to WGN and Tom Skilling over the years here, over the last decades, have been fortunate enough to watch somebody who is absolutely at the top of his game doing this, predicting what was to come and informing us, and not just giving you the information, but explaining it, the context, the flavor that he gave when he was going over the radar and showing you why this system of wind coming over the Rockies was going to raise our temperatures over the next few days. Making meteorology somewhat interesting, I think, is a feat unto itself, but really just kind of doing the service of letting people know what to expect and how to dress for the days ahead and kind of how to prepare. That's something that we have been very blessed with in this area for those of us in WGN's broadcast distance. And I know I am far from the only one in the city who's going to miss Tom Skilling's 10 p.m. forecasts and just kind of his vibe around the city. And thankfully he says he's got to be sticking around. I certainly don't blame him for spending more time in Hawaii and Alaska and stuff like that. He's earned it. But man, it's not going to be the same seeing some weather forecasts without him. But I just wanted to give a nice tip of the cap and a friendly wave goodbye to Tom Skilling because he's had a hell of a career. What a run on WGN, and he is absolutely going to be missed. So I'm smoking one for you, Tom. Oh boy. And let's roll right into the News Joint Wrap. This is a wrap-up of cannabis-related news stories and events in and around Illinois, and it's all curated for you by IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Think of it as the joint you can hit for all your Illinois cannabis news and reviews. And I wanted to start here with a House Bill 5633 that would remove cannabis patients' registration requirement. Illinois Representative Nicholas K. Smith introduced on the 9th of February this House bill, which would remove the requirement that in order to substantiate a patient's medical condition, a patient must provide the name of the registered medical cannabis dispensing organization. This would be amending the Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Program Act and also provides that a patient may purchase medical cannabis from any licensed dispensing organization during the provisional registration period, as well as deletes the provision that medical patients must enter the registry identification number of that organization the patient designates into the verification system. Basically, you can kind of hear how this bill is trying to clean up the process and make it a little bit less clunky so that med patients can use their card during the provisional period, that 90 days while your card is still getting approved. The article goes on to talk about other House bills relating to cannabis this legislative session, the most significant of which for cannabis patients, HB 5284, would eliminate healthcare facility restrictions on medical cannabis use by registered qualifying patients. And then HB 4465 is basically a protective tax rate amendment for medical patients. And the article wraps up saying the only significant Illinois Senate bill introduced this session was SB 3099, which would eliminate the requirements for a physical medical cannabis examination for those applying for a med card and registered card holders in the medical cannabis program. And then another article here talks about a different Senate bill, 1723, moves to a subcommittee on cannabis. That bill deals with several provisions for craft growers recently moved from the executive to the subcommittee on cannabis. Senator Kimberly A. Lightford originally proposed the bill that amends the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. 1723 incorporates craft grow amendments dealing with licenses, production of THC oil, transporting organizations, advertising, and taxes. SB 1723 deletes the provision stating any person or entity awarded a craft grower license under specified provisions, quote, shall only hold one craft grower license, and removes language providing that a craft grower shall not be located within 1,500 feet of another craft grower, but leaves in the restriction for a cultivation center. Another provision requires the Illinois Department of Agriculture to issue an additional 30 craft grower licenses on or before May 1st of 2024, and an additional 30 craft grower licenses on or before September 1st of 2024 under specified conditions. So that is a really cool and interesting key part of a sub portion of this bill, is that basically this year we could have up to 60 additional craft grow licenses doled out here in Illinois. So that's very exciting stuff. There's a lot more detail in that particular article, which you can find on IllinoisNewsJoint.com, as well as some highlights. There is a dispensary highlight, Jason Brown, highlighting Revolution's dispensary in Maryville, as well as the new OK Cannabis dispensary in Evanston that I speak with my guest about this episode. So if you're near either one of those, definitely worth checking out these reviews by Jason Brown at IllinoisNewsJoint.com, and some great reviews of products, including Raspberry Punch High-Dose Gummies by The Botanist, Alien Rainbows Vape Cart by Connect Wellness, and White Wedding RBX Live Rosin by Legacy. I've got to tell you, for my money, I've really been getting into this live rosin, not really using dab rigs to kind of have the concentrate by itself. I'm not like torching that in the glass and just using it by itself. But I have been smoking joints, and I've been putting some live rosin in them, or some of the hash or batter, some of these little concentrates, along with, kief and everything. And man, I see why these infused joints are so popular. It is a really little special pickup. It's a nice, cool way to really elevate a basic joint, or just kind of your smoking experience. So that's something worth considering as well. You can find all of that information, as well as much more about news and events related to cannabis in or around Illinois, all at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Before I get into this week's interview, listener, I wanted to tell you about something in case you haven't heard about this new partnership. You know that I'm a big fan of coffee. I talked about it earlier in this episode. I mention most weeks about how I love starting my days with a nice mix of cannabis and coffee. If I'm able to kind of have that indulgence, if I'm able to do that, I love to whenever I can. And there is an interesting coffee company that I have partnered with through the Vouch Store. Now, this is a link that you can get to in the description notes. If you scroll down, you can see the Vouch Store is highlighted there in the description notes. And if you click on that, it'll take you to the Cannabis Man show page at vouchstore.com. And on that show page, you will see products from Split Rock Coffee. Split Rock is a small business that's owned by veterans, and it is delicious. It's wonderful tasting. The aromas are fantastic, and I know you're going to love these as much as I do. You've got options here: breakfast blends, medium roasts, 100% Colombian. They have cold brew options, and more. So if you're like me and you like to start your day with a little mixture of cannabis and coffee, or if you're somebody like a lot of my colleagues in media and just like to take down a few cups of coffee throughout the day, something I very much missed during my dry January, but I've certainly been indulging in coffee since I've gotten back here. If you're like that, you will love this Split Rock coffee. So just scroll on down and click that Vouch Store link and you can get some for yourself. Also on the show page, at a different end of the vibe spectrum, some alcoholic beverages from Camp Craft Cocktails. What Camp Craft does is you can order some of these, and depending on whatever your cocktail of choice choices. If you like tequila cocktails, if you like gin, if you're a brunch punch person, if you like cranberry martinis, whatever your drink spirit of choice is, Campcraft Cocktails has something for you. You click on it, you order it, you get a box, a nice little fun package arrives at your doorstep with all the ingredients you need for bar-level executive cocktails, split into various jars and recipe cards and simple how-to instructions to brew these cocktails at home and enjoy them at your leisure. If that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, click that Vouch Store link in the description show notes and get a little gift for yourself of Campcraft Cocktails and wait for those to show up at your door. St. Paddy's Day is coming up. I'm really looking forward to some Irish car bombs. It's become something of a tradition in our household to have some Irish car bombs around St. Paddy's, and my wife is still very pregnant, so she won't be able to take part, but I am certainly going to indulge in those. It's definitely it's a tradition, it's a ritual that I have to take part in. And if something like that sounds good to you, go ahead and click that Vouch Store link and get yourself some Campcraft Cocktails and get to brewing. Listener, my guest today is quickly becoming a staple in Chicago's bar, restaurant, and food scene in general. There's a lot of great times to be had at the various locations that this company has gotten involved in over the last few years. This is a group that has become a restaurant group. It was founded in 2008 around Chicago by a couple of guys who were working in a different restaurant group, and then they became friends. They started working together, and as Chicago was about to implement a smoking ban in bars, that is, they saw an opportunity to bring higher quality foods and service into a sports bar environment. And they opened the 50/50 bar in Wicker Park, a bar that I was a huge fan of when I was kind of living in the area. I spent many a Friday and Saturday night there enjoying their wings and taking in a sports game or two. And now they have moved into the cannabis space. They have OK dispensaries in various parts of Chicago, and they have West Town Bakery, which I think is such a cool combination of the great food that they make as well as cannabis products. And they have a new location in Evanston along with the spots in Wheeling and Chicago. And here to talk about all of these exciting developments and more going on with the 50/50 restaurant group is Scott Weiner, co-founder and principal at 50/50. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I just wanted to say, we were talking a little before we started the interview here that I am just a huge fan of the 50/50 because I spent a good amount of time there taking in sports games around 2015 and 2016, and I loved the wings. I mean, all the food was good, but the wings really stood out, and obviously over the last few years, those wings have gotten a lot of acclaim and recognition around Chicago.
It's cool. I mean, I appreciate it for one. You and I have probably done a shot or two together.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, that 50/50 turned 16 first day of March Madness this year. So it's wild. I'm 43 now, and it's just wild to think about how big of a part of my life this place has been, and where it's also taken me.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, so let's start just with your journey, if you don't mind. I mean, you were working in Chicago bars and restaurants. I don't know if you mind that we say, but I'd be happy to cut it out too. But you were working with the Let Us Entertain You group before, and that sort of allowed you to see an opportunity for a different kind of restaurant group, it seems like. Can you talk a little about what led you to starting the 50/50?
Sure. Well, I mean, Lettuce was, I guess, part of my plan, if you will, and I'm still real close with Rich, RJ, and Lettuce has been a great company, so by all means, don't cut anything out.
Okay, great. Sure.
If I wasn't doing my own thing, I would still be working with and for them. But I grew up in Northbrook. My first job was the opening team of a Johnny Rockets in Northbrook Court. Fell in love with the industry. They started sending me to the iconic location that was on Rush in Delaware when I was 16. So I'd go on like a Friday, Saturday night and wait tables at Johnny Rockets on Rush in Delaware, make like $300-400 in tips. Had a fake ID, so I'd go to Jilly's and I'd go to some of the old places down in this area, and I just fell in love with the bar and hospitality scene. And it's really kind of all answer the question. That's when I decided I want to do this. And when I was 16, this is all I've ever wanted to do my entire life. I followed that passion to UNLV, where I worked with a group called China Grill, and I was in Mandalay Bay for 4 years cooking. And originally I'd planned to come back to Chicago to open up the China Grill here in Chicago with them. Their construction took a little bit. I applied online on monster.com and got a call from Lettuce, and I got hired as the youngest employee, actually, at Joe's Stone Crab.
Wow.
Brand, as a manager. And I worked my way, quickly. And my other business partner, Greg Moore, was the AGM there at the time. One of my other partners, John Eldape, he was also a manager with us. And one of my other partners, Martin Ariano, was actually a line cook there. Several people, actually, now that I think about it, work with us still that worked with me back 20 years ago at Joe's. But yeah, as you said, we saw the smoking ban. I saw an opportunity, and I was a smoker. So, I was kind of going to O'Callahan's till 4 a.m, and a good burger was just like, because it wasn't a frozen puck,
Right.
And I was like, well, once people can't smoke in bars, I think food's going to be more important. And, we were working with steak, lobster, stone crab, in all of the restaurants I really worked in and Greg prior, he was with the Gibson's group, we're all relatively upscale. And we just said, it's not that we were the first, but we just said there really is not a lot of places in Chicago where you can get, food made from scratch, using classic French techniques in a sports bar sort of world. And that's where 50/50 came from. My days off, I'm not getting a steak, I'm eating cheese fries and wings. And so we ended up doing it. We opened in March of 2008, and then, immediately went into the financial crisis, but we didn't take shortcuts, and we kept on going. We had to get, we just grinded it out.
Yeah, and that's so cool just to hear you kind of go through that, Scott, because a lot of great name drops there. I mean, Johnny Rockets, I was a regular at the Old Orchard location of that when there was one of those, and Joe's Stone Crab, that Rush location, that's a regular New Year's spot for me and my wife and other friends. That taste of the Stone Crab and the environment that you kind of came up in there, managing that spot. I can't think of many better places for somebody to kind of come up. That's a competitive spot as well, but it's also so unique. And I think it's really cool that a lot of the people that you're working with now were working with you there at that Joe's location when you were first when you came back to Chicago, and were getting your manager kind of, shoes worked in, let's say. I just think that's really, really cool. So you start the 50/50 in Wicker Park. You kind of get going, as you mentioned, the recession comes there, 2008. That obviously must have made the first few years kind of a rough start. People they lost a lot of their expendable income. I'm sure a lot of people weren't coming out to bars as much, although I know that during recessions and depressions and stuff, alcohol and cigarettes and stuff like that, sales do remain kind of high. So maybe there were still some people coming to those spots. But you guys have obviously grown quite a bit since then, and you've got lots of establishment around Chicago. You guys have Roots Pizza. You've got, you're with the Second City. You've got all kinds of stuff here. And for the purposes of this podcast, you've moved into the cannabis space as well. So if you wouldn't mind, talk a little about how the OK Cannabis dispensaries came about for the 50/50.
Well, as you said, we're not a one shop, we're not, whatever the word is, one stop pony, whatever.
For sure. One trick pony. There you go.
One trick pony. There you go. One stop shop. We've got a lot of different concepts, so obviously there's Roots, there's West Town Bakery, Homestead on the Roof, the Berkshire Room. So we do a lot of different things. And not to toot my own horn, but we do a lot of things well. Like the Berkshire Room has had national acclaim. A bar we had, the Sixth, Apogee, both had national acclaim. Homestead on the Roof, believe it or not, was the second rooftop in Chicago with a liquor license. There's a lot of things out there that we did that were firsts that nobody really, we were like, oh man, we were so ahead of the game. But, when you stop and think about it, we've always been doing stuff that's a good blend of, I think, commerce and art. And I don't think we've ever tried to open up a place that's pure commerce. That's just, let's just grind it out and make as much money as we can. And we've also been, I have a fiduciary responsibility to my investors, to my partners, that we're not going to do these, super art places that make no money and close. and blow people's college funds. So
Sure.
we've always kind of tried to like thread the needle in doing things that we're passionate about, that are unique, but also have the opportunity to make money. And where cannabis actually came about was, so on Chicago Avenue, we've got Roots, which is 12 years old. We've got Westtown Bakery, 12 years old. Homestead on the Roof, 11 years old. And these are two big buildings. We own the real estate. We had bought the next building next to it, which was attached kind of defensively 6-7 years ago, thinking at some point we're going to sell the real estate, as part of our retirement, I guess. And we need to have this building, or it's like having Marvin Gardens and Ventnor, but you don't have Atlantic, you're in trouble. So we bought it, we tried leasing it to different tenants, and it was not, they struggled. And when I saw cannabis, I started thinking to myself, I'm like, my restaurants here are getting old. No restaurants last forever. If we had a dispensary next door, I wonder if that would just bring a lot of new traffic to this street, and maybe add to this longevity of the restaurants. And so that was really how it started. And I thought to myself, I'm like, well, I've got this bakery next door, and it's a smaller footprint. I was like, why do I need a waiting room for people to get in when I can just have them wait at the bakery or wait at Roots? And that's when the wheels kind of started turning. And then we ended up, being a part of 3 of the licenses that came out, and we decided, well, it looks like we're going to be doing more than one. We should think about what a brand might look like, and found property in Wheeling that was a former Twin Peaks, and we're like, this is right. We're going to turn the bar area into Westtown Bakery. We're going to make this room a consumption room, and we're going to do this. And we have a packaged liquor license, so we can do farmers market. We actually have a farmers market permit. So we're going to make this like a flagship. We're going to do all these cool things, and we'll do baked bingo on Tuesdays, and we'll have a bunch of cool stoner ladies playing mahjong on Mondays. So that's sort of like, I guess how where the wheel started, where it became. And then I was like, I'm the vice chairman of the Illinois Restaurant Association, and I've done enough restaurants, so I'm fairly familiar with how the state and even city governments work, and I started looking, because I had to read the cannabis law. I had to read it word by word to understand it, entering into a market. But I already knew a lot about liquor, and in my head, I'm like, there's nothing that says I can't do both. And I arranged to get a call with the state and their attorneys to find out if that was true, and they're like, hey, you might have figured something out here. So that's when, we're like, yeah, let's have a liquor license. And then from that perspective, we're like, well, let's just keep the kitchen that Twin Peaks had. And, we didn't keep everything, but, now if somebody wants to, host a private event there, a birthday party, they want steak and lobster and they want to smoke joints, we can do that. They want steak and lobster and they want to have Jordan Cabernet and smoke a joint, we can do that. So that was sort of the, all of a sudden we're like, all right, well, we think we're mixing art and commerce here. And kind of went out on a limb, created this brand, and then, the third one just opened up in Evanston. That will be our 6th Westtown Bakery, and our 3rd OK Cannabis on Howard. This is a tough one, right? Because on Evanston's side, it's Howard and Chicago, but in Chicago, it's Howard and Clark, but we're right by Howard Station.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think that landmark is the key, because obviously, everybody knows that Howard Station over there if you're CTA rider like myself and so many others. But Scott, that is awesome. I mean, the way you just kind of described that, the overlap that you talked about. I mean, first of all, kind of buying the property next door, and then realizing that, like, hey, this is next to a bakery. Why, instead of having people just kind of wait in line, we can have them come over to this separate business and patronize that. I think that, I don't know how things work in other markets, but I know that Chicago's a town where people are comfortable waiting a while for a specific food experience. I think of a lot of different things, the Pequods in Liquor Park, that is, or Lincoln Park. That one, I know that there's a movie theater nearby, that there's other bars and restaurants next to it. If you put your name in and there's a 2-hour wait, rather than finding somewhere else to eat, people will just patronize a business nearby and wait for their time. Same thing in the West Loop with Au Cheval, the burger place. I know that there was always like a 3-hour wait for that. People would go across the street to Haymarket and wait the 3 hours. So I think it's really smart that you spotted that same thing, and that you combined that with, this cannabis opportunity, and also thinking the thoughts that you were just kind of talking about, where you're giving an experience to people who now there are not many places, I can't really think of any other than yours, that have liquor licenses and cannabis licenses, as well as food on the premises, where you can hang out, you can have great food, you can have a cocktail, and you can smoke a joint. It really does seem like you've kind of stepped into something here that it feels like people are going to be wanting that as like a standard going into the future.
Well, I mean, to your point, it's the first in the country. It's still the only consumption lounge in the country that serves food.
Yeah, I mean, even that's incredible. I mean, even the only one I've been to for Illinois is like, it's that Rise in Mundelein, but they do not serve food, nor do they have alcohol. And there's a time limit on how long you can hang out. So I got to say, yours sounds like a much better, opportunity there.
I mean, we're hospitality guys, right? And that's sort of what we're looking for. I mean, I got to be honest, like hanging out there, like eating some walking tacos, smoking a nug roll, and playing baked bingo might have been one of the best times I've had this year. But it's still it's a work in progress. Like if you go there, I'm constantly like rearranging furniture. I don't know if you remember back in the old days at 50/50 when we used to have that game on the bar, where you could like put a quarter in and play some of those cool
yeah, I do remember that.
I brought that over there, so
dude,
it's a cool spot. It's the first cannabis dispensary consumption lounge that's on Open Table, and I think the coolest thing, and I hope you're a loyalty member or a rewards member for the 50/50 group. It also, you can come to Kindling, you can go to any Utopian Tailgate, earn points, and use your rewards at the dispensary or vice versa. So it's also we have a very unique loyalty and rewards program that you can dine, you can smoke. Eventually we'll be able to incorporate some of this stuff into Second City. So it's a cool thing. Now, I mean, is it all making money right now? No, we're still got a lot of room to grow. Like, I'm not sitting here telling you I'm on top of the world either. I'm just very passionate about what it is we're doing. And to your point, like I've had calls with other cannabis regulators in other states that are like, how do we create what you guys did, and how do we do it safely? And because we're doing it safe, and that's also a big part of what we bring to a community. We're not fly-by-night operators that are doing this for the first time. We're professionals.
And I think that makes a huge difference. I mean, your experience coming up in a group itself, but also opening so many different restaurants in the Chicago market, and you've obviously worked in other markets around the country too. So your experience, as well as your group at the 50/50, I think, to your point, that is a major asset working for you guys. I mean, I don't think it's any coincidence that your experience in this market allowed you to spot the opportunity of having a place where you could have such a vibe of playing bingo, smoking, drinking, eating great food, and that now others want to, maybe look to replicate that. I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, you guys, your experience allowed that to happen, and I think that's why other businesses that might like to do something like this here, I'm seeing why that there isn't such a rush so far of products and experiences like what you guys are offering, because I just have to think that people have to be overwhelmed with the kinds of hoops to jump through, with getting the paperwork done, with talking with the right, groups here in Illinois to get the licenses, to get everything up and sort of on the up and up and safely. As you said, obviously what you guys have done in the past has set you up perfectly for this moment. And even though, as you just said, I mean, it's still a work in progress. You guys are growing. For my money, I know that won't be the case for long, because I think that people have been waiting for something exactly like what you guys are doing right here.
I appreciate it. Can I just say one thing to that? I'm not the majority owner in OK Cannabis. Now, I do have a pretty big stake in the real estate side of it, but I was brought in by a team, a social equity team, a veteran, public servants. I was brought in because they said, if this guy knows how to make it in restaurants, which is literally nickel and dime, but now the margins are even less than a nickel.
Right.
If this guy can make it here, we think that he could be somebody that could help us stand up our cannabis operations and navigate how difficult of a process even just getting a license, a cannabis business open is. So I will say that, even just getting to the point of the licenses wasn't easy. My team had a lot of faith in me, which helped. But there's also just a lot of licenses that haven't opened, because I can tell you that there's predatory lenders out there, there's predatory investors out there. It's very, very difficult to get a bank account. Like, I have to use a separate payroll company for my payroll for the dispensaries that charge me 4 times what my restaurant. So, I mean, there's a lot of other reasons that are making it challenging in cannabis right now. And the only thing that's really gonna help that and save that is change that, is if we can get that Safe Banking Act passed in Washington.
Right.
And, the rescheduling too. So anybody that's even been able to open up a cannabis dispensary in any state, but Illinois especially, like, they deserve, and I know I did something unique, but they deserve just as much recognition and respect, because it's not been an easy, the cards are stacked against you.
Yeah, totally. And I appreciate you saying that, because I've had people on the show who have tried to open social equity dispensaries and have not been able to do it. The stories they told about their journey was just heartbreaking. As you said, I mean, you do have the card stacked against you, whether it is predatory lenders, whether it's giving all the money to the state, not winning that lottery so that you don't get the license, and then, you're kind of stuck. I've heard so many really discouraging stories about people who have tried to get in and who haven't been able to do that. And I think that's a really important point to bring up, is that OK Cannabis is a social equity business. And I think that people want to support those now, because, as Governor Pritzker has said, and as Illinois Cannabis has come up, the social equity component was a huge part of it right from the beginning. And as I've said on the show many times, and as I keep kind of trying to harp on, it is imperative on us, as cannabis is legalized and normalized, and, as you said, hopefully safe banking and rescheduling. I mean, we're all waiting for news from the DEA or the FDA to kind of move this process forward. But we cannot leave the communities behind who were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And that's why I think people inherently, there's an instinct to want to support social equity dispensaries. So I think it's great that OK Cannabis falls into that category there.
I also, let's take this into the restaurant world, right? As a restaurateur, I live in Chicago. I have restaurants all through Chicago now, but I lived in Wicker Park, for years, kind of near where I was California in Armitage for 6 years. I was Western in Iowa.
Right on.
But when you support a local business, a local restaurant, when I make money, I spend it in the community, right? And that's really if you really want to, like, I'm a huge deadhead, right? And one of the stories I loved hearing about Jerry Garcia was he didn't die super wealthy, because he literally spent all his money within that dead community. He figured out ways to spend money, usually quite stupidly, but
But the effort is impressive,
The effort was impressive, and Jerry had a lot. And I look at my restaurants and all my employees. We all live in the neighborhoods. We live in the communities. OK Cannabis is the same thing. We're all Chicagoans. So when you spend money at any social equity dispensary that is truly not backed by somebody out there, like, we're one of the few that there is true, even of some of the social equity, there's no big money behind us. There's no dispensary out there in another state backing us. It's us. It's all us, and it's all local people. And the money, if it is made ever, will be spent in the communities of where it's made. When you go and honestly, I'm also not trying to don't go and spend money at those big MSOs. Like, there's some great people involved in those organizations and work there. But at the end of the day, they're paying stockholders that are all over the world, all over the country. And the best thing we can do for Chicago right now, especially based on a lot of the challenges Chicago's going through, is make sure that the money that's spent in Chicago stays in Chicago and gets recirculated in Chicago. And not just Chicago, but our suburbs. So to me, social equity, there's tons of reasons why that's important to bring people that were impacted by the war on drugs. But if you need another reason to support a social equity business, it's because that money's staying in your community. It's going to make your community stronger.
I love that, Scott. I mean, I think that's such an important message, and I do think that people are looking for that. I mean, we live in a world of MSOs, as we talk about multi-state operators here. I have mentioned them on the show, and I've talked with a lot of them too. Cresco, GTI, and Verano. Like, I mentioned them. I have good relationships with them, but at the same time, in life in general, I know that people are like, there's always that war between convenience and supporting local. Are you going to order that thing off of Amazon, for the the fifth time this week, or maybe, go down if you have like a small mom and pop shop down the block, can you maybe get something similar there? I think people are always playing that tug of war in their lives. We want to support local, and then the convenience or maybe the mousetrap that's built by the MSO is sometimes just too compelling. But I think that's something that we all are walking every day as purchasers, like as consumers who have money to spend in the economy. Who are you supporting? And thinking of your dollars as votes to kind of support businesses one way or the other, I think that's a really good way of thinking of it. And the way you kind of spelled it out right there about how supporting social equity dispensaries like OK Cannabis, that keeps the money in our community. That's going to recirculate it in Chicago and the Illinois suburbs and the state at large, which is really what we want legal cannabis to be doing anyway. We want that money to be coming back to us and being spent in the community, because I think that we all can reap those rewards. And then it's like the money you're spending is, you're enjoying the rewards of that twofold,
It's the only true way, in my opinion, to make all of Chicago more equitable, is we need to eliminate the middlemen that are funneling money to stockholders that don't live in this state. That's your Amazons, that's your Ubers, that's your Grubhubs. And I bring those up because they'll soon be, they're lobbying very, very hard right now at the federal level to get safe banking passed, because they know once that happens, these third parties, then they can start being your middleman for cannabis. And that's when they'll start funneling that money out. I mean, that's what they do. And look it up. You want to see who the largest lobbyists are for rescheduling and safe banking? It's companies. It's Amazon. It's Uber.
Yeah, I've read that too, Scott. I'll dive into a story about that later in this episode, actually. But you're absolutely right. I've read the exact same thing. They are spending lots of money lobbying for safe banking. It's true.
But you gotta keep no matter what you do, whether it's my restaurant, somebody else's restaurant, my dispensary, or Ivy Hall. Keep the money in the communities, because that's the only way our communities are going to grow. And the true inequality of the wealth gap, the only way you can even make a dent in that is to spend your money local.
Right on. Yeah, well said. And definitely you guys at the 50/50 group with OK Cannabis and your Westtown Bakery, you guys are making a really compelling case for people to do just that. And I definitely encourage you to get out to one of those locations we talked about, listener. Scott, one more thing before I let you go. I wanted to tell you I was able to try some of the buffalo wing sauce from the 50/50 group that was infused with THC. That was a combined effort between the 50/50 group and Good News, the Cresco brand. And I was able to try some of that on some wings during the Super Bowl. My wife is, 7 months pregnant, so she didn't partake, but she made me, a bunch of wings. And the experience I had, I talked about it on the show a little bit, but I've just tried my best to kind of spell it out for people as best I can. But it was unlike any experience I've ever had before, because the complexity of the wing flavor, it was like this fun dance of like sweet, sour, and spicy, and it all kind of mixed well together. And then about 20 minutes later, in like the fourth quarter and overtime, I was dealing with, feeling stoned, which was, pleasant, and I wanted to be, but it was just so crazy to me that like my mouth was still kind of on fire. The sweet sour mix was fading. And then I'm sitting there like becoming more and more stoned, watching this football game that I care less and less about as it goes on. It was amazing. And I just think that these kinds of experiences are what I talk about on the show all the time. This kind of innovation that you guys are doing and allowing for brand new novel experiences for us who have used cannabis maybe for decades but have not gotten to try something like that. I just wanted to applaud what you guys are doing there, because I had a great time, and I know a lot of other people did as well, and I just want you to keep up the great work. It's excellent.
I appreciate it. I will make one more pitch on that similar thing. So we have a Westtown Bakery infused brownie mix, confetti mix, and the Devil's Food Cake.
Ooh.
Devil's Food Cake's gluten-free and vegan. The confetti mix is vegan. The brownies might be the best brownies you'll ever have and they're low dosed because they're so damn good. We don't want you to get high too fast. It is fast acting, but if you get a chance, and these are only sold at OK right now, we are selling them out at Cloud9 down in the southern Illinois.
Gotcha.
But this is one of those things that, like, we've all made pop brownies poorly. And
Totally.
And this is one of those things that if you get an opportunity to come in and pick it up, I don't want to say it's a life changer, but I would tell you it's a party changer. You serve these at a time when you have some friends over, and it's kind of like, okay, now I get, because this is meant for people that are not huge cannabis users. It's a lower dose. It's going to sink the shoulders a little bit, add a little giggles, and nobody's going to be super high climbing on the walls. This is one of those things to me where you talk about making an experience like that. I can't recommend enough. Will just people talking about it when they came to your house and had those things. So,
oh man,
that's my pitch.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it.
No, thank you for making that, because I'm definitely writing that down right now. I will be making some of those brownies with that mix. I'll get over to one of the OK cannabis locations to get some of that, because man, that sounds fantastic. And to your point too, I think that blend, that sweet spot of people being able to eat, good food, and to not be climbing the walls, as you talked about, to not be kind of glued to the couch, wide-eyed and incapable of socializing with anybody, because they're just too far gone. I think a lot of us have had those experiences, and there are plenty of people who have had those experiences, and that's why maybe they turned away from cannabis in the first place. So I think having such a low dose option, and that's why I always talk about things like the drinks that are becoming more popular, gummies as well, but something like these brownies sound amazing too, because there's such a low barrier to entry. You having a brownie compared to like some of the dab rigs that people use for concentrates, where it's like 6 pieces of glass and a blowtorch. Right. One of those is a lot more approachable than the other one is. And so when we talk about normalizing cannabis and we talk about destigmatizing it in our society, something like, these drinks, these brownies that you were talking about, those sound perfect. And if you throw a party with people, some of who've never tried this stuff, and then they get to have a brownie, which is the equivalent of like a light beer or something that's just gonna change the vibe slightly.
Exactly.
But it's not gonna alter their state to the point where they're like, they need to be committed for 7 hours until it, ramps down a little bit. I think that is just so crucial to normalizing and destigmatizing this.
That's exactly what we're trying to do with OK. That's exactly what this specific brand with the brownie mix is for. There's something for everyone in cannabis, and this is 100% meant to be destigmatizing. Because I have a low tolerance myself, and I love cannabis. I don't want to commit to 7 hours of it, though. So, yeah, you nailed it.
Totally. It's totally reasonable. And I know there are so many people in my life who they're exactly the same. I mean, tolerance varies from person to person and substance to substance, certainly. But I think that the way that we make more people friendly toward cannabis or comfortable experimenting with it is to have these different tiers where, lower and lower tolerances can still get just kind of a little hi, hello there, like a handshake, rather than like, a jujitsu roll into, some kind of cannabis party that they really weren't prepared for. As I always say on the show, nobody wants to go on a trip that they were not prepared for. It's never going to be a good time that way. So I just love what you guys are doing. And listener, get on out to one of the OK Cannabis locations there, or the Westtown bakeries that we were just talking about. And you can get some of these excellent brownie mixes. I'm definitely going to get some of those and try some of the other products as well. But any of the restaurants at the 50/50 group, join their loyalty program and get yourself some points so that you can go on and use them at one of these dispensaries. I think that, Scott, that's really cool too, because I see these other dispensaries trying to kind of get a loyalty program going, but none of them have restaurants and bakeries that you could use these points at. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is, to us, that's one of our kind of secret weapons. And then when people start realizing, oh, you guys have that restaurant. Oh, you guys got that one. And that's the trick. And we have, our loyalty program is actually, because it was already very generous because of the restaurants, we couldn't like roll that back. So it's probably the most generous loyalty program of any, definitely in the state. I mean, you're getting between $20 and $30 back for every 300 points, and we make it real easy. A point is at least $1. So it's easy to earn, it's easy to get rewards, and it's already been kind of a big part of why we've, I think, been able to hang on here and even grow a little bit. So I appreciate you calling it out, and I really just appreciate taking time to talk to me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for taking the time to kind of share about your journey a little bit and where people can try some of these products. Listener, if you're interested in any of these, we mentioned some of the restaurants that the 50/50 Group has: Berkshire Room, Bunny Slope, Homestead on the Roof, as well as the OK Cannabis dispensaries, including their newest location in Evanston, and the Westtown bakeries, along with many others. You can head to the5050group.com. That is FIFTY and then the number 50group.com. You can see all their establishments, join their loyalty program, and plan out your next visit to one of these great spots. Scott Weiner, co-founder and principal at the 50/50 Group, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Thank you so much.
And there you have it, listener. I want to thank one more time my guest, Scott Weiner, for coming on the show, stopping by, and talking about the great history and the great work that the 50/50 Group is doing. Like I said during the interview, like I've said many times on this show, I really feel like supporting local businesses is great. It's a great thing to do, and especially here in the Chicago area, there's a lot of competition among food groups, among bars. There's millions of people in and around this city, more so that come in, especially when the weather gets nice. So over the summertime, there's a lot of competition between places, and people got options for spots to go. So if you are not giving people a compelling option in terms of food, vibe, drinks, entertainment, you're not going to last very long in this market. And the 50/50 Group has not only lasted now for over a decade, but they have expanded significantly. And I love that Scott and his colleagues are kind of taking the same attitude and the same respect that they have for people in the food and beverage industry, and they're taking that and they're moving it into the cannabis space. As we said a little bit during that interview, I think that there are certain parallels that people can enjoy in third places. People talk about the importance of having a third space in our lives. A lot of us we spend most of our lives at work and at home, and there is value, incredible value, in third places, these spaces that are neither work nor home. And depending on what activities you want to do, depending on the vibe you want, those spaces are really important in our lives. And to be able to have some of these third spaces coming up where cannabis is not only allowed but encouraged, they have great products for you to buy, and you can kind of linger and hang out and order food and drink as well, and really just kind of unwind from maybe stress, whether it's coming from work or home or just life in general. Being able to have more and more of these options near to where you live, where you can go and smoke a joint and maybe have a beer or just some delicious baked good if you want to. Whatever vibe it is you're looking to cultivate, I love that we're getting more and more options like this, and it seems to me like the 50/50 Group has all the right things in mind as they're expanding here, and we're all going to get to enjoy this. We get to benefit from their great work. So bravo, Scott Weiner, and everybody at OK Cannabis, Westtown Bakery, and the 50/50 Group. Keep up the great work. I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes. Now, I have a few topics and news stories I wanted to bring to your attention before I let you go this week, listener. One of them came up during my interview with Scott about the companies that are lobbying the hardest, spending the most money, trying to influence Congress to pass safe banking related to cannabis and rescheduling initiatives and more. There's a Marijuana Moment article here that was published January 24th with the headline, Uber, Amazon, PayPal, and others report marijuana lobbying on banking, rescheduling, and more. I won't read the entire article. I will share it in the description notes like I always do. I encourage you to click on this and read the whole thing for yourself. But I wanted to give you an idea of the companies here who are spending this money, because it's worth understanding a little bit about, how this sausage is being made and why these companies would be interested enough to spend this kind of money to make these changes. So Uber, along with the Office of Colorado's governor, are among those who've disclosed federal lobbying on cannabis reform legislation in the past quarter. Meanwhile, Amazon, American Express, pharmaceutical companies, labor unions, cannabis businesses, prohibitionist organizations, and others have also continued to put pressure on Congress over various cannabis-related proposals, according to fourth quarter of 2023 reports that were filed with Senate and House of Representatives as required by law. Kyle Yeager, the author, notes that this appears to be the first time that the ride-sharing and delivery service company Uber Technologies has become involved in federal marijuana lobbying, with a report filed showing expenses related to advocacy around the bipartisan Secure and Fair Enforcement Regulation, or SAFER, Banking Act that has advanced in the Senate as well as its counterpart in the House. I've brought this act up on the show before. It's the one that so many businesses have their eye on because it would allow cannabis businesses access to the federal banking industry, so it would allow for business owners to get access to credit, to open certain accounts, to allow us as consumers to maybe pay for things the way that we do anything else in the U.S., which is to say we can use whatever cards are in our wallets, not just the debit or ATM cards or cash. We'd be able to use our credit accounts and everything else that we use to pay for normal things as well. That legislation cleared a Senate committee in September and is pending floor action. And then Kyle goes on and shares an extensive list of companies who are lobbying clients on cannabis issues this past quarter. Altria, Amazon, American Bankers Association, the American Bar Association, Cresco Labs, Curaleaf, Jazz Pharmaceuticals, Liberty Mutual, Morgan Stanley, National Beer Wholesalers Association, National Sheriff's Association, NORML, PayPal, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, SAM Action, which is a group, I don't know if I've brought them up on the show before, but they are an anti-cannabis legislation group, which is important to point out. It is not just pro-cannabis companies and attitudes who are spending money to influence Congress here. It is the other side as well. It is those who are anti-cannabis legalization, who are spending money to influence members of the government as well. Scott's Miracle Grow, Teamsters, Trulieve, and the U.S. Cannabis Council round out that list. It is an article with more details, and again, I encourage you to click on it yourself and read a little bit more context into why those specific companies are looking to change policy regarding cannabis. Another article I wanted to bring to your attention, this one is just out today, February 29th, from when I'm recording this, and I've spoken about this on the podcast before, somewhat recently, actually with Paul Armentano of NORML. CNN, among other publications, back to their old tricks again. There was a new American Heart Association study that found, shocking, any use of cannabis linked to, quote, higher risk of heart attack and stroke, study finds. Anytime there's a study that finds something negative about cannabis, you can feel pretty confident that CNN is going to be shouting that from the rooftops, and here they are again doing exactly that. Right in the first few paragraphs, they say here, quote, cannabis smoke is not all that different from tobacco smoke, according to the lead study author, which we know is not true. We know that cannabis smoke is very different from tobacco smoke. We have plenty of studies proving that, but don't expect any of that nuanced context to follow in this particular article. They go on to continue to peddle the old typical reefer madness, studies showing that smoking cannabis has significant cardiovascular risks, just like smoking tobacco. This is particularly important because cannabis use is increasing and conventional tobacco use is decreasing. Why does that have anything to do with findings about cannabis? I would say that it has nothing to do with it, but again, it just shows you where these study authors are coming from when they voice this in their own conclusions and findings. Tobacco use is decreasing. Tobacco companies are not happy about that. Cannabis use is increasing. So who do you believe has a more vested interest in publishing studies like this one, which basically find no medical benefits of cannabis and only risks that everyone needs to know about? I would say the tobacco companies have a vested interest in that. No conflicts of interest were reported here. Neither was where their funding came from, so we will never know. But I'll tell you what we do know, that this study was based entirely on self-reported Data. That's right. There's no empirical data here. The researchers didn't observe any subjects, and didn't have any kind of activities or anyone doing anything live and basically looking at what happened and running a typical scientific process experiment like that. What this study did was it evaluated self-reported data across different studies from users. They also made no distinction between smoking and vaporizing. And as everybody knows, dry herb vaping does not produce any carbon monoxide or tar, but they made no distinction about smoking or vaping. All they say is that inhaling cannabis increases concentrations of, ready for this, blood carboxyhemoglobin, some fun new fear-inspiring word. Carbon monoxide, a poisonous gas, and tar, they mention the combustible matter. So I'm not going to go on in this article. You know how I feel about CNN relating to cannabis coverage, listener, and you know how I feel about these kinds of studies. What bothers me is not that studies come out saying that there are risks associated with cannabis. That doesn't bother me. I will be honest with you on the show about legitimate cannabis risks. I've talked about it. You've heard me say on the show that cannabis can become addictive. A lot of my stoner brethren will not say that. They'll die on the hill that cannabis is non-addictive, but I've gone through the nuance and context of that issue many times on the show before. As much as I love cannabis, I think it's foolish to pretend that there's no addictive properties to it. We as human beings can become addicted to gambling. We can become addicted to sugar, substances, or behaviors. And just because cannabis is not as physically addictive as something like heroin or alcohol or nicotine, that doesn't mean that one cannot become addicted to it. It's pleasurable, so therefore addiction potential is there. I'm not sitting here hiding behind the point of view that cannabis is all good all the time for everyone. I would never say that to you. I don't believe that, and that's not the kind of message that I'm spewing here on my show. I want to give you the best new information that people are getting here. But at the same time, working in media and seeing what other publications are doing, and how when there are medically beneficial articles highlighting what cannabis can offer people in terms of quality of life improvements, you don't really see any of those articles on CNN. You only see ones like this. And again, CNN is certainly not the only publication who is guilty of stuff like this. There are many, there are legion publications who engage in the exact same thing. But CNN is big, they have more reach, and something like this, you tend to see stuff like this catch like wildfire, and everybody starts to share it. And that's part of where I find myself triggered by stuff like this, is when I see these headlines and I know that people are going to be splashing this all over social media, and they're going to be kind of repeating this old reefer madness propaganda because a publication like CNN Health, which does have a large audience and a large following and sort of a belief that maybe they have some integrity, when they splash a headline talking about a study like this that's all based on self-reported data and makes no distinction between smoking and vaporizing and doesn't have any of the nuance about kind of daily users versus non-users, and there's none of this really important context. All it is, hey, be afraid of this. More people are using cannabis and there's this risk no one's talking about. That I view as irresponsible. And that's why I want to bring it up on the show. This to me is a flippant disregard of their journalistic responsibility. And I'm going to call it out when I see it like that. And so that was something I wanted to share with you, listener. I am sure that today and this weekend and probably next week, you're going to see articles highlighting this study, linking back to CNN and the initial American Heart Association link. They're going to be talking all about, hey, higher risk of heart attack and stroke. What's important here, what I want you to do whenever you see articles like this, look into it for the original source, look into their study, and think critically about it. Ask yourself questions like, okay, how large is the sample group here? What's the control? How many people are we talking about? Is this 15 people? Are they all 40 to 50 years old who live in Canada? Or is this a widespread study of tens of thousands over the course of 10 to 30 years and people from all over the world? One of those, to me, whatever conclusions they draw, I would pay more attention to than the other. And if a study is relying completely on self-reported data,
versus empirical measured data by researchers during the experiment. Some people might say that doesn't really matter. For me, it does matter. So I think critically about that. But that's really what matters here, is think critically for yourself. And I believe that that's important with every issue. You know, in every year, not just an election year, but all the time. I think what's better is to get information, get informed on any issues that you deem important, and never just allow one publication to kind of tell you how the world works. You should be reading news from different sources. And right here on this show, as much as I love cannabis, I will tell you straight when something is found is a risk that we need to be concerned about with cannabis. Fentanyl-laced cannabis, that is not a concern that we really need to be spending any kind of energy on. That's total fear-mongering. However, higher THC percentages leading in some cases to psychosis and other kinds of mental issues, that's something that we're seeing more and more evidence for, and that's something I've talked about on the show as a real legitimate concern. Tolerance matters. It varies individually. So there are people who have a huge high tolerance for cannabis where 35% THC isn't really going to make a big difference to them. But maybe to some 19 or 20-year-old who has no tolerance for cannabis, and they go and they smoke a joint that's 30% THC and totally out of whack in terms of natural plant balance from what the crop actually is like. You know, one of the things that happens with the human mind is that fears that are easier to imagine or picture are the ones that we take most seriously. And the ones that are far off or very slow moving, like the frog in the pot of boiling water, we are not as good at diagnosing those risks or taking those seriously. Look at global warming. Look at climate change. That's an example of something that, you know, some scientists have been sounding the alarm about that for decades, but because it's so far off and because it's so hard to kind of pinpoint direct causes and sort of indicate like a specific deadline as to like, okay, now there's more hurricanes. Now there's extreme events. We're already at this point, but like, because climate change is not an oncoming train where it's like we have until Friday to do something about this, that makes it hard for us to take seriously. And so when articles come out with headlines like this, like, oh, smoking cannabis leads to higher risks for strokes and heart attacks, or teens becoming psychos from using cannabis and all that, that is a risk that for especially like parents and anybody, you know, who cares about other people, which is a lot of us, those risks are easy to imagine and they feel larger than life and worth paying attention to. Whereas the risk of stroke or heart attack from things like stress or clogged arteries from a bad diet, those don't make as effective headlines because those concerns or dangers are not as in your face and like easier to imagine the threat from. So anyway, I've gotten off on a little bit of a tangent here. I'm definitely still feeling that lemon sugar from before, along with my coffee here. But the point is, I saw this CNN article and I wanted to kind of share it with you because I know that you're going to be seeing it over the next week here. And I just wanted to bring up, like I always do, we want to be thinking critically about these things, about all topics certainly, but cannabis as well. And one more piece of news I thought was worth bringing to your attention, listener. I've brought up on the show before longtime Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky. And this week, just Wednesday, yesterday from when I'm recording this, McConnell announced he will be stepping down from his leadership position in November. The 82-year-old is the longest-serving Senate leader in history, and he said on the Senate floor, it is time for a next generation of leadership. And the reason I'm bringing this up to you, listener, is because this could have a significant impact on the future of legal cannabis, especially the immediate future. Because for a long time, Mitch McConnell was a staunch opponent of changing cannabis's status under the federal government. And this announcement has already spawned a lot of speculation as to what this is going to mean for the immediate future of cannabis, as well as who is going to be replacing McConnell as the new Senate Minority Leader. And my immediate take from this is that this is going to be good for cannabis, but the truth is that really depends on who is going to be replacing McConnell. And there are plenty of candidates who might even qualify as more extreme in terms of their opposition to federally changing cannabis's status. So this may not really be a good thing for cannabis as well. It's just going to depend on who takes his place. And I'm going to be reaching out to some sources in Washington, D.C. to see if I can get somebody to come on and talk about who has a good chance to take over for McConnell and where they stand on cannabis legally in the U.S. And we'll kind of get a look ahead as to what may be coming down the pike here in the coming months and years. But for now, I will leave you with that. I hope those stories gave you some stuff to think about over the weekend. A lot of positivity. Still, the momentum in favor of legal cannabis continues to move and march forward, even though, as I always say, there is still the force on the other side, the antagonistic side of those who are anti-cannabis. They're still very much there, and the pushback, even though there are so many of us who are loudly supporting cannabis and we know it's the right thing to do, and that noise is making its way to Washington, D.C., there are still those out there who are still peddling the same old reefer madness propaganda, who are still kind of fear-mongering and saying things just like that Heart Association study I talked about earlier, kind of trying to shout from the rooftops the fear about all the negative, risk potential of cannabis and not talking about the possible rewards and any of that stuff. So that's why it's important, I say, just to think critically about these things and always be considering and reflecting about how cannabis fits into your life and if it's still offering the same positives that it always has been, or if maybe it's time for a change or whatever. Even taking a dry month or a dry week, just little tea breaks here and there, offering yourself some clarity of reflection can be a really good thing to do, even as hard as it is. As I mentioned, after the dry month and during it, it is worth it. It can be tough, but it's worth it, and it certainly makes coming back to cannabis all the sweeter, like it has been for me this past month of February. But on to March and on to a glorious weekend. I hope you enjoy it. Be sure to follow the show at C-Man Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, and the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page, and subscribe on YouTube or whichever podcast platform you use. Do me a favor and leave a rating or a review, and share the show with your friends. Tell people about it you think might like it, and if you really enjoy what I'm doing, become a subscriber. Hit that support the show link in the description notes and subscribe to the show through Buzzsprout. You'll get an email from me thanking you, and you'll get your name shouted out in the show credits next week. Tune in again next week for more news and events relating to cannabis in and around the U.S. as the prohibition against cannabis is closer and closer to ending every day. We're keeping an eye on it, and I'll keep you informed here on the Cannabis Man Podcast. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Goodson.